leading up to the weeks leading up to our period, right? So, and I know for me it was like, oh, I feel so much more hunger the weeks leading up to my period. What's wrong with me? Right? It comes back to that, like, what's wrong with me? Versus I just didn't even know that your body is going through so much more metabolically speaking leading up to your period, so you do need more calories, and that's okay. And that's okay. Give yourself a break on that, right?
See, women are always more complicated.
Yeah, we are. And you have both perspectives here, but these are kind of some signs that we're not eating enough protein, especially in the afternoon, right? Still feeling hungry at the end of the meal or an hour later is a huge sign. Like I said with my smoothie example, that was just not enough protein, especially specifically animal protein for me, right? Or if you're spacey or unable to focus, if you feel jittery, or if you feel this surge of like nervous or scattered energy, which is really your blood sugar crashing, trying to get your attention, if you feel irritable, or if you're not really recovering well after workouts or busier days and you feel run down as hell the next day after, that's a sign that you're probably not eating enough protein. And these are just some common symptoms.
Erin's irritable with me a lot, so I'm just going to put chicken breasts in her face.
Just dangle a chicken breast in front of my head. That's fine. I'm okay with that too. Yeah. So that's just some real symptoms, right, of not getting enough protein. So we have these numbers in front of us, but I think it can come out in other ways as well.
And really quick, I'll just interject. This isn't on a slide per se, but just speaking of like metabolism type of stuff, like, again, I think it's just a common thing that's just take a second to touch on, but you know, like eating 6 meals a day or eating 3 meals a day, like, again, sometimes we've heard like we better eat like 8 times a day because every time you eat it boosts your metabolism. And like, yeah, it is true. Every time you eat it boosts your metabolism. But what they fail to do, again, a lot of these studies, right, they get done, it's a real catchy headline, and then it takes forever to like get different information out because everyone's adopted this idea. But yes, every time you eat it boosts your metabolism. However, what they failed to look at was like the total calories you consume. You just boost your metabolism higher. Like if you eat 600 calories at once or 300 calories twice, the overall metabolic effect is the same, okay? And a benefit of so really, like, we honestly encourage people to eat like 3 or 4 actual meals rather than grazing. Like it can work, but like our digestive system honestly likes rest as well, right? So when we're always inundating it with food, and then it's also like you're just more likely to overeat as well. Like if you have a tendency to, you know, snack a lot and grab a little thing here and there, it's more opportunity to overeat. And with the bigger meals, it also ties in with on the protein side of it, especially as we age.
This is a good point.
We need a certain amount of protein to trigger muscle protein synthesis. Okay, so when we're a little younger, usually like 30 below, even like mid 20s, like so muscle protein synthesis is basically like building muscle. Okay, it's a little bit more like a dimmer switch. So you eat a bit of protein, you'll kind of get a bit. But actually, as we age, it becomes a little bit more like an on-off switch. Okay, so we need a certain threshold to actually trigger muscle building or an anabolic response, essentially. And that actually comes down mostly to this amino acid called leucine, which ties into like, it's higher in animal products, okay? And we need about 2 to 4 grams of leucine to trigger this muscle building response, which works out to about 25 to 30 grams of protein, okay? So if we're eating like little amounts throughout the day, we're probably not triggering that stimulus that we actually want, right? Most of us want to build muscle. It doesn't mean, you know, you're going to turn to the Hulk. It's just like muscle is very preventative in terms of a lot of diseases as well. And osteoporosis, all this stuff as we age, we want to preserve muscle, right? It's super important. So what we typically like to do, that's one of the reasons why we also like to have 3 to 4 bigger meals a day to ensure we're getting that spike of protein that we need to build muscle, okay? So protein, like, honestly, is obviously super important.
Yeah, and like, it's not only what we eat, it's what we absorb. So if we give ourselves a chance, our digestive system, a chance to take a break, And honestly, we say like 12-hour fasts are like okay. Like
Well, it
it's
should probably
basically
go 12 hours without
right,
eating.
and that's basically
And it's not really that
while
hard.
you're eating. I mean, while you're sleeping.
Like you finish dinner well at 6, you don't eat again until 6. Like it's really not that
Yeah.
crazy, but we should be giving our digestive systems like a 12-hour break.
And that will help us synthesize protein and it'll help us assimilate nutrients a little bit better as well. Now let's talk about carbs.
What is this?
That's like, carbs are mad. That's
Okay.
yeah.
This means bad?
That's me hiding
Fair.
from the carbs.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they've done studies too on like if low carb or high fat is better for weight loss or whatever it is, and
Low carb or high carb?
Low carb or high carb, sorry, and the answer is no. It doesn't really matter how much carbs we get as long as we're kind of in that deficit and we're getting enough protein, right? So it comes back to that protein again. Yes.
Just before we get into the carb number, I want everyone, I should have done this actually earlier, but whatever your total calories are, take 25% of that. And that's the lowest I want your fat calories to be.
Well, yeah, we're getting to fats.
I know, but just before we maybe figure that out. Or
no, because I put this.
Well, that's fine. We can still figure that out.
40.
Just figure that out. We'll use it later then.
I would say 30 to 40% of what you have left as far as your caloric intake is. Okay, yeah, that's fine if you want to do it that way. And then the rest is fat.
I don't. Just the minimum. So 25% is honestly about the minimum you want for fat calories for hormones.
And like I think a lot of the time, it's just what you feel better having, right? Like if you feel better having a bit more fats and protein and it keeps you feeling satiated and you don't have a lot of
that's why I was going to minimum
cravings, I'm just talking generally, then eat more fats with your protein, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean you can't go higher than 25%. I'm just saying you don't want to go lower.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if you feel better having, like for Matt and I, like I've never eaten so many carbs in my life training and working in this kind of job because they are like they're our quickest kind of energy source for our brain as well and our muscles, and they give us that immediate kind of like spike in energy. And so if you feel better, and this is such a thing for me, like when I was starting to lose weight or diet, I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I can't have carbs, that's going to make me fat or whatever. And that's actually not really true. I think a lot of the time we get kind of, taken off the beaten path with what is the right or wrong kind of approach. And it's really just how we feel, right? If we feel better having more carbs, then put more carbs in, right? And it also regulates our blood sugar. Having like carbs with every meal, it can regulate our blood sugar, especially for females. I find carbs help to attenuate cortisol a little bit. So when it comes to stress and hormones, and carbs actually will help us to buffer those spikes in estrogen and progesterone, obviously, but they also help us with sleep too.
Because like insulin and cortisol inversely related, right?
Inversely relate.
Should be like carbs are going to increase insulin, and that'll help decrease cortisol, basically.
Right. So
if we don't get, and the science behind that is, if we don't have enough carbs, we need glucose like as energy, right? So our body will break down protein. Like we can make carbs essentially, but it's a very stressful process. Okay, we need cortisol to do it. And cortisol is like a stress hormone. It's not bad, but if it's always elevated, it's bad. So it's called gluconeogenesis, but basically our body will break down protein into its constituent amino acids and make our own carbohydrate sources essentially. But again, it's like just because our body can do something doesn't mean it always should be, right? Like we have survival mechanisms to survive from multiple sources, right? But like, it doesn't mean that's good. Like it's honestly better to get, again, it's a different approach for different folks. But a lot of times, if we're under eating carbs all the time, it does become a little bit stressful.
This is a huge thing in my life.
Especially if you're training hard, Yeah,
this is a huge realization for me that as soon as I increased my carbs, I felt way better. I felt way more energy. I was getting way more, better lifts, all this kind of stuff, right? And just feeling better overall.
And I was keto for like 3 years or longer. So like I've had experience with it, right?
That's what I mean. We've done the extreme stuff ourselves too. So we've been there. But yeah, if I would have like kind of kept myself in that same like perspective, as Mel was saying, like coming here for a different perspective, but if I kept that like carbs are bad kind of perspective, I would have never gotten, leveled up to the, and integrated having more carbs. I would have never done that. And I probably would still be feeling really horrible, not getting good sleeps, feeling what's wrong with me. I should be able to go through this whole low carb thing. It's such a good, healthy approach. And that's just not really the case. So.
Yeah, typically as a minimum for carbs, like around 100 grams is typically what brain function, nervous system function kind of likes.
But I just put at the bottom here, 30 to 40, I don't know why this is cut off, but 30 to 40% of your calories that are left might be coming from carbs, right?
I mean, again, it's like your minimum, you've got your calories, right? So your minimum for fat is 25%, right? And then honestly, it's like a play with that.
Yeah.
Some people, like, it just comes down to two, like, okay, if you're working out, then it's going to be a bit about performance as well. You can use that as a metric, right? And then honestly, it just comes down to personal preference. Like, if you like a little bit more like fatty foods, cool, then you just budget a little bit more like of your caloric budget to that, right? This is where it comes in. Like, so that's why I'm trying to give you like a couple minimums is like, okay, we've got our protein, right? We always want to set that first because that should be like, make sure we're hitting that. Like, and if you guys are tracking, sometimes people just go, okay, I'm going to track protein and calories and that's it. Okay, cool. Like, that's fine. Some people get stressed out for tracking. So it's like, okay, do the minimum, at least track protein. But once you've got your protein and then you've got your minimum fat, you've got a lot of play in terms of like what you feel best eating. And that's where it takes just some experimentation. There's not a hard and fast rule like everybody in here, I can tell you exactly what to eat. No, like you got to go eat some shit and see how you feel and perform, right? Like it's just that's just the way it is. But you've got your fat minimum, you've got your protein, right? And then the remainder is like, okay, like what do you feel better with? What do you like better? And like eat that stuff. Like I think a lot of us tend to overcomplicate it too. And I know the numbers sometimes can be like complicated a little bit, but once you get used to that, I think we overcomplicate like, okay, should I have whole grain rice? Should I have brown rice? Should I have white? Like, should I have this chicken? Should I have beef? Should it be extra lean or lean? Should it be grass fed? Like, do you know what I mean? Like there's a ton of stuff. And like, is it at some point maybe going to be important? Like maybe, but like, don't miss the forest for the trees type of thing, right? Like if you're not even tracking and don't know your numbers, like just focus on that. Like that's the most important thing to do right now and get a baseline. And then you tinker, you got years to play with it, right? And learn.
Yeah. And I think too, like a lot of the time, like I'm not really a numbers person, whereas Matt is more of like a numbers kind of person. So I'm more of like the symptoms kind of vibe, right? So here again is an example of like, okay, I go through my day, I maybe have been increasing my protein, I'm having some carbs, but I'm still having some of these types of symptoms, right? Like still finishing lunch or dinner, and instead of feeling hungry 2 hours later, maybe you have a sweet or some kind of salty craving. That's a sign that we're not feeling as satiated, because fats are actually very satiating. They help us with our cravings and whatnot as well. Feeling spacey, noticeably spacey, could be a sign that we're not having enough fat. This is a big one, less emotional resilience around those afternoon to evening transitions from like work to home, right? You come home and you feel like a little bit not that resilient, and you just, lash out at your kid or whatever, and you're like, why the hell did I just do that? That could be a sign that you're not eating enough protein or fat to sustain your energy throughout the day, right? So these are just kind of like examples of symptoms, right? Because like I said, I'm more of like a tactile symptoms kind of reflection person, and Matt's like more in kind of the numbers game.
And there's also like
we're going to go over
there's
an
a
example.
Course from like Precision Nutrition that we've both done, but some people, again, if tracking really stresses you out, you can use your hand as a measurement, which typically works out pretty well. Like a thumb would be a serving of fat for most people. Usually your hands grow with your body, so it's like the bigger you are, typically it works out, not always exactly again. But if some people get really stressed about tracking, it's like a thumb's a serving of fat. Your closed fist is carb, cupped hands, veg, and
a full palm.
The palm is like a protein. Okay, so it's just like very rough
So next thing you know, you're
tools.
going to go out for dinner and people are going to think you're sign languaging your food.
Yeah, right, exactly. You're doing sign language to your food, basically.
Yes, yeah, I've got everything I need. Okay, yeah. So here's a bit of like a breakdown as far as what we were talking about, and this is what we want you guys to leave with today as like a takeaway of what would my caloric and macro breakdown look like based on what kind of goals I have, or what are my, like, what trajectory am I heading in? So we got that 1 gram per pound of body weight for our protein, right? So say, right, I didn't even, right, this is not my example, but 155 times 1, right? So it's 155 grams of protein. So 620 calories are coming from protein, right? And I put carbs can be set at 30 to 40% of the remaining calories that we have left. But Matt did it 25% fat minimum carbs, and then you can play around with that. But you could do it the opposite too, right? So it's just another way to see, like, it's not all or nothing. There are many ways to go about this. You're not wrong for experimenting and figuring this out. But yeah, so an example of a client with a 40% carb intake of 2,000 calorie target would have their carbs at 200 grams. So they would be eating around 800 calories or 200 grams of carbs, right? And then the rest is fats, right? And so 584 calories from fats, right? Which is 64 grams technically of fats. So technically this macro breakdown would be P 154 or 155, C 200, and F 65. And then what we would say would be, or something, even if this was just what I was trying to calculate for myself, okay, here are my rough numbers. Let me go and experiment. Let me take 2 weeks. Let me track. Let me get some ideas of what my symptoms are like. Do I feel like I have enough energy? Am I getting good sleeps? Am I crashing? Am I actually getting towards my goals? And then make more shifts from there. Do you have anything to add to that little breakdown?
No, I think that's it, right? It's just, again, another like performance thing is, if you're into working out, right? Like, again, it's like if your performance is suffering, you're not recovering from workouts, maybe you're not making progress in the gym like you want, or yeah, then you probably are a little bit low on the carbohydrate side, right? I like to set fat at the minimum because I think a lot of us see like the 9 calories in fat too, right? So it's just, and don't get me wrong, like, if you're eating like a shitload of fat, it is the easiest one to cut back on because it is just the most calorically dense. But that's why I like to set a bit of a minimum, right, of it, because it typically is like easiest to overconsume, right? Like a tablespoon of peanut butter. Most of us when he's like, oh, there's chicken there. I see what you guys got there. Oats.
Come on over.
But it's typically the easiest to consume, right? Like a lot of us do a tablespoon of peanut butter, and if you actually weigh it out, it's probably like 2 to 3 times as much that you're putting in, right, than an actual tablespoon. So sometimes just weighing things out it can just elucidate, if you will, like actual serving sizes. And that's why, like nuts, for example, which Aaron's going to weigh out. I guess it's kind of hard to see down there. But,
I'll come around.
But yeah, so like a lot of us will have handfuls of nuts, and like, it's not that they're not healthy, right? But they're super easy to overconsume,
And it wouldn't be the best protein.